My name is Thomas Miller, and I never imagined the sharpest wound of my life would come from my only son. On his 29th birthday, while I held a homemade cake in one hand and a velvet box in the other containing my father's watch, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "The best gift you could give me is to disappear from my life forever." That moment shattered nearly 3 decades of sacrifice, love, and memories. But what he didn't know was that his cruel wish would be granted in a way he could never undo. By the time flashing police lights filled our yard, the course of both our lives had already changed forever. Before I begin, I want to ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. On the morning of my son's 29th birthday, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. For weeks I had been planning a surprise that carried more weight than any gift I had ever given him. My hands were steady as I decorated the chocolate cake, piping his name across the top in blue icing. But my heart raced as I placed the velvet box carefully under my arm. Inside lay a gold-cased watch worn smooth by time, a piece that had once belonged to my father. It wasn't just an accessory, it was a legacy cleaned and fitted with a new leather strap so Ryan could wear it proudly to job interviews or one day on his wedding day. I believed this gift might finally remind him of what really mattered, the bond between father and son. The April evening light spilled golden through the sliding glass door, and I could hear the sounds of laughter from the backyard. I thought they were waiting for me, but as I reached for the door handle, the voices carried clearly through the glass. "Man, your dad went all out," one of Ryan's friends said. "New sound system, top-shelf beer, even catering. He's really trying to buy your affection." My chest tightened as Ryan's voice followed, smooth and dismissive. "Yeah, well, he always does. Thinks money fixes everything." I froze. My fingers clutched the cake plate so hard, the cardboard flexed beneath my hands. 29 years of sacrifice, every meal, every hospital bill, every sleepless night shrunk into a cheap laugh line for an audience of friends who didn't know the truth. And then came the words that cut deeper than any blade. "Honestly, the best gift he could give me is to disappear from my life forever." The sound of laughter followed, careless and cruel. My knees weakened, and for a moment I thought I might drop the cake right there on the floor. The velvet box under my arm felt suddenly heavy, as though the watch itself had absorbed the sting of betrayal. My father's words echoed in my memory. "A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back, so spend it on what matters." I had spent nearly 3 decades on Ryan. Yet at that moment, he treated me as nothing more than a nuisance, standing in the way of his freedom. I took a step back from the door, careful not to be seen. The roast I had cooked hours earlier was cooling on the stove. The dining table was set with plates and silverware waiting for a family dinner that would never come. Instead of celebration, the house felt like a showroom, a beautiful display staged for strangers. I carried the cake and the watch upstairs, away from the laughter, and placed them gently on my dresser. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on my knees, and let the silence wrap around me. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder, sharper. It was the moment when disappointment turns into resolve. That night, Ryan thought he had embarrassed me. But what he didn't know was that his words had set something in motion, a change neither of us could ever take back. I sat in the dim quiet of my bedroom, the muffled laughter from the backyard, pressing against the walls, like an unwanted echo. My eyes kept drifting to the watch on the dresser. My father had wound it every night at 9, a ritual that reminded him that tomorrow's hours belonged to no one but himself. I had planned to pass that lesson on to Ryan tonight, but his words outside his casual wish for me to vanish made me realize that the time had come to teach him something different. Not through a gift, but through consequence. I rose slowly and walked back to the landing, the hum of the refrigerator and faint music from the speakers below clashing in my ears. Through the glass door, Ryan stood with a beer bottle in one hand and a spatula in the other, flipping burgers on the grill I had bought last summer. His friends circled around him, laughing, drinking, treating my backyard as their private stage. I studied their faces. Kyle with his smug smirk, Derek with his lazy grin, Melissa with her eyes fixed on her phone until Ryan spoke. Not one of them looked uncomfortable with his mockery. To them, I was just the butt of the evening's entertainment. My hand pressed against the banister, feeling the grooves of wood I had sanded myself only 2 summers ago. Every inch of this house carried my labor, my money, my time. Yet my son wanted me erased from it. The anger that might have once flared inside me did not come. Instead, clarity took its place, sharp, calm, decisive. I thought of all the times I had chosen silence over confrontation, the bills I paid without asking for thanks, the bail money I once slipped quietly across a desk to save Ryan from shame, the countless weekends I spent alone pretending not to notice he hadn't called. Each time I told myself patience was love. Tonight I realized it had only been delay. I stepped down into the kitchen. The plates I had set earlier looked staged, untouched, mocking me with their readiness. The roast on the stove had gone cold, grease congealed along the edges of the pan. A feast without an audience. I pushed the plates aside, sat at the end of the table, and listened. Outside, Ryan was telling another story, this one about how I embarrassed him at a car dealership last year. His friends roared with laughter. My jaw tightened. I didn't storm out. I didn't shout. I simply sat there, and for the first time in years, I let myself imagine what life would look like if I truly gave Ryan what he claimed he wanted, a life without me. The image wasn't frightening. In fact, it was freeing. At that moment, a plan began to form, not born of revenge, but of necessity. I would no longer be the crutch he leaned on or the fool he ridiculed. If he wanted me gone, he would discover what gone really meant. And by the time he understood, it would be too late to take his words back. The laughter outside grew louder, each chuckle a reminder that I was no longer part of my own son's life, not as a father, not even as a man to be respected in his own home. I sat in the kitchen chair, my hands folded on the table, staring at the untouched place settings I had prepared. For nearly 3 decades, I had poured myself into Ryan's life, always telling myself that if I just gave a little more, pushed a little harder, he would rise to meet the man I knew he could become. But tonight, his words stripped that illusion bare. I turned my head toward the sliding glass door. Through the glass, Ryan leaned against the railing, laughing as Kyle clapped him on the back. Derek sprawled on the deck with his boots scratching against the paint I had applied last spring. Melissa finally looked up from her phone, smiling at something Ryan said. My son, my only son, stood there basking in their approval, his insults about me feeding their laughter. Something inside me hardened. I thought of the nights I stayed awake when he was sick as a boy, counting his breaths until morning. I thought of the years of tuition payments, the groceries, the car insurance, the time I covered his mistakes when no one else would. Every sacrifice now felt like bricks in a wall he had built to shut me out. My reflection in the glass startled me. The man staring back was not the father who had once knelt on Little League fields or sat up late teaching fractions at the kitchen table. This man's jaw was set, eyes narrowed, and I realized he looked more like my own father than I had ever admitted. My father who had taught me that discipline was love and silence could be as sharp as a blade when used correctly. The cake sat upstairs on the dresser, its icing lettered carefully with Happy 29th Ryan. The velvet box beside it held the watch, its hands still ticking in perfect rhythm. Together they were supposed to mark the beginning of his adulthood, a symbol that it was time for him to step into responsibility. But now they felt like artifacts of a life that no longer existed. I rose from the table and paced the kitchen. For a fleeting moment I considered carrying the cake outside, pretending I hadn't heard anything, smiling for his friends, as though nothing had been said. But the thought died quickly. That would only confirm the lie Ryan had told them, that I was a man desperate for his son's approval, willing to buy affection at any price. No, tonight would be different. Tonight his words would not vanish into the air. As I stood in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator behind me, the plan began to crystallize. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I needed only to act with precision. Ryan wanted me to disappear. I would give him exactly that, but on my terms. I walked back upstairs, shut the bedroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed once more. The clock read 6:42 p.m. By 7:45, the yard outside would glow with red and blue lights, and Ryan's laughter would be replaced by silence. What he thought was a joke tonight would become the most serious lesson of his life. I stayed in that room longer than I planned, the quiet pressing in on me like a heavy coat. Downstairs, the music thumped, the laughter spiked, the grill hissed. My son was celebrating, never once wondering if his father, who had built the very deck he stood on, was listening from just a few feet away. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned off, leaving something colder, sharper. It was like a gear clicking into place. Once you hear that sound, you can't unhear it. At 7:15, I walked down the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood sounding louder than it should. The dining room table, still set for a family meal, looked like a display in a furniture store, beautiful, untouched, and meaningless. The roast sat limp and forgotten, its aroma faint now, as if even the food had given up on being eaten. I reached for the phone on the counter and dialed a number I never thought I'd call for my own son. "County Dispatch, what's your emergency?" The voice was calm, rehearsed, the kind that cuts straight to business. "There are trespassers in my backyard," I said. My tone surprised me, steady, factual, almost clinical. "I've asked them to leave. They refuse." The dispatcher didn't hesitate. "We'll send a unit, sir. Stay inside." I hung up and placed the phone gently back on the counter. I didn't pace. I didn't tremble. I simply stood there, staring through the sliding glass door at the scene unfolding outside. Ryan, my own flesh and blood, leaned against the grill as if he owned every inch of it. His friends laughed louder now, their voices carrying across the yard. Not one of them had built that fence, paid that mortgage, or kept those lights on. Yet they acted as though my presence in this house was optional. At 7:40, the first flicker of red and blue appeared down the street. My chest rose slowly as the lights grew brighter, bouncing off the siding of my home. 2 cruisers pulled into the driveway. The music outside faltered, then stopped altogether. A hush fell over the crowd as Officer Grant and Officer Ramirez stepped out, uniforms, crisp, movements efficient. I slid the glass door open and stepped out just enough for Ryan to see me. His smile faltered when he noticed the officers. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, spatula still in his hand, like some kind of shield. "This," I said evenly, "is me granting your birthday wish." Officer Grant's voice was professional, firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, the property owner has asked that everyone leave. If you do not, you will be trespassing." Kyle puffed out his chest. "Come on, man. It's his birthday. We're not hurting anyone." Officer Ramirez didn't blink. "Not the point. You've been asked to leave. That's the law." One by one, they began to scatter, Melissa slipping out with a mutter, Derek following behind, a couple of neighbors leaving without meeting my eyes. Ryan stood frozen, jaw clenched, as his kingdom unraveled in front of him. By 7:45, the yard that had been full of laughter just minutes earlier was nearly empty. The only sound left was the low crackle of the dying grill. My son's face was pale in the flashing lights, and for the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes that looked like fear. Ryan's fists curled at his sides as the last of his friends filed out through the gate. The deck creaked under his boots, the same deck I had built with my own hands, every board nailed down after long days at work. Now it was just him and me, in the glow of the cruiser lights, the officers standing by like referees who already knew the outcome. "You're doing this in front of everyone," he spat, his voice laced with a bravado that rang hollow now that his audience had vanished. "Yes," I said simply. "In front of everyone. You told me to disappear. Tonight I'm starting with you." Officer Grant stepped forward, his tone calm but unyielding. "Mr. Miller, you need to leave the property for the evening. You can return tomorrow for your belongings, but tonight you're trespassing." Ryan laughed sharply, though there was no humor in it. "Trespassing. This is my home." He jabbed a finger toward the house. "I've lived here for years. You can't just throw me out on my birthday." I folded my arms, steady as stone. "You've lived here because I allowed it. This house is mine, paid for with 35 years of my labor. And you told me you wanted me gone. So I've decided to honor your request, Ryan, starting now." His eyes darted from me to the officers, searching for some ally, some lifeline. But all he found was the law reflected back at him. Officer Ramirez shifted his weight and said evenly, "Your father is within his rights. If you refuse to leave, we'll have no choice but to escort you out." The defiance in Ryan's posture sagged, but only for a moment. He grabbed his jacket from the railing, shoving his arms through the sleeves with jerky movements. "Fine," he muttered. "Enjoy your empty house, old man." He brushed past me, the smell of beer and smoke trailing behind him, and disappeared into the night. When the cruisers pulled away, the yard was silent. Plastic cups and paper plates lay scattered in the grass, beer bottles tipped over on the deck. The grill still smoldered, unattended, a bitter reminder of the celebration I had been excluded from in my own home. For the first time in years, the house exhaled a quiet that wasn't hostile but honest. I stepped back inside and locked the sliding door. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, not defeated, but resolved. Upstairs, the cake and the watch still waited untouched, their purpose rewritten. I no longer saw them as gifts for Ryan, they had become symbols of something larger. My father's watch would remain with me, a reminder of his words. "A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back." That night, as I sat at the edge of my bed, I understood that this was not the end of something, but the beginning. Ryan thought he had asked for my absence. What he didn't realize was that I had already decided how to grant his wish, and that when I disappeared, I would take more with me than he could ever imagine. The morning after Ryan's birthday, the house felt different. It wasn't just empty, it was hollow, as though every echo reminded me what had been said in the yard the night before. The roast still sat on the stove untouched, its edges hardened from the night air. The cake, still covered by its plastic dome, looked like a cruel joke, mocking the hours I had spent preparing it. Upstairs, the watch rested in its box, quiet, steady, faithful, just as my father had been. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The silence was unnerving at first, but then it began to feel like clarity. For years I had avoided confrontation, telling myself patience was wisdom. But now, as the clock ticked on the wall, I realized patience had turned into permission, and Ryan had taken every inch I had given him until there was nothing left. I pulled open the top drawer of my desk and retrieved a thin folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the deed to the house, the property tax receipts, the insurance policy, and the bank statements. Documents that spelled out ownership in black and white, my ownership. Ryan could laugh, belittle me, and even wish me gone, but these papers reminded me that this house, this life was mine. The phone buzzed mid-morning. The caller ID read, Santa Clara County Jail. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the automated voice played back the message, you have a collect call from Ryan, an inmate at Santa Clara County. I didn't press one to accept. I set the phone face down and took a sip of coffee. His words from the night before still rang in my ears. The best gift you could give me is to disappear. That was when it clicked. If Ryan wanted me to vanish from his life, I would. But not quietly, not temporarily. I would vanish in a way he could never undo. I would sell the house out from under him, erase the safety net he had come to treat as his birthright, and leave him with nothing but the reality he had avoided for years. I grabbed a notepad and began to outline steps the way I used to when troubleshooting engineering problems at work. Step 1, contact a realtor. Step 2, set a fast timeline. Step 3, move only what I need. Step 4, leave no forwarding address. The plan was clean, logical, irreversible. By late morning, I had already chosen the realtor. Her name was Anna Johnson Sharpsuit, in her headshot 5-star reviews, praising her as efficient and discreet. Exactly what I needed. I dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice smooth and professional. Mr. Miller, she said after I explained, you want to sell quickly? Yes, I replied. Within a week, if possible. There was a pause, then a shift in her tone, the kind that recognizes urgency and opportunity. That's ambitious, she said, but not impossible. Tell me about the property. As I described the home, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't rage and it wasn't grief. It was resolve. For the first time in years, I was taking control. Ryan had asked me to disappear, and by the time he came home, I would have done just that. Anna arrived that afternoon, her heels clicking against the hardwood. I had refinished myself years ago. She walked through the house with her phone out, snapping pictures, noting details in a small leather-bound book. This will show beautifully, she said, running her hand over the granite countertop. You've clearly taken care of it. I didn't respond. The truth was, the house had been my life's project. Every nail in the deck, every coat of paint on the walls, every appliance upgrade had my fingerprints on it. But as I watched Anna circle the dining table, the same table I had set the night before for a dinner that never happened, I felt nothing. It wasn't mine anymore, not in the way it had been. It was a tool now, the sharp edge of a lesson. She gave me the market rundown, comparable sales buyer demand, how quickly cash offers were moving. If we list at $845,000, I expect strong interest, she said. I'll agree to $850,000, I countered. And if we close in 7 days, I'll add $5,000 to your commission. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, and then she smiled. Consider me motivated. We signed the paperwork right there at the dining table. The same table Ryan had mocked me for insisting we eat around as a family when he was a teenager. The ink was still drying when I realized how quickly things were shifting. Yesterday, Ryan thought he owned this place by default. By the time he walked out of county jail, it would belong to someone else entirely. After Anna left, I pulled 3 suitcases from the closet and laid them open on the bed. I packed slowly, carefully. Shirts folded with precision pants, rolled tight papers stacked in neat piles. I didn't pack the way you do when moving across town. I packed the way a man does when he intends to shed his old life like a skin. If it couldn't fit in my car, it wasn't coming with me. The silence in the house deepened as the day wore on. No footsteps overhead, No thumping bass from Ryan's sound system. No slammed doors. For the first time in years, the house was honest. It wasn't holding its breath, waiting for the next argument. It was still. That night, I didn't bother cooking. I poured a glass of water, ate a sandwich over the sink, and carried the watch box back downstairs. I set it on the kitchen counter right in the center, where Ryan couldn't miss it if he returned. My father's words echoed again in my head. A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back. I had wasted too much of mine trying to make Ryan into someone he refused to become. At 10 p.m., I got another call from the jail, another collect call from Ryan. Again, I let it go to voicemail. His voice clipped and angry came through the recording Dad pick up. You made your point. Come get me out of here. I didn't delete it. I didn't save it. I just let it sit there like the echo of a choice he hadn't realized he made. By the time he was released, the house and everything he thought he could take for granted would already be gone. 2 days later, Anna called with news that didn't surprise me, though it came faster than expected. We've got a serious cash offer, she said. Full asking price, no contingencies, closing in 5 days. Perfect, I told her. My son will be released in 6. The timing was almost poetic. By the time Ryan came home, his key would no longer fit the lock. The life he believed was waiting for him. The house, the kitchen, the deck would already belong to someone else. I accepted the offer on the spot. The next days were a blur of methodical action. I called the bank and closed the joint phone plan Ryan had been riding on since college. I canceled the utilities, each one scheduled to end the day after closing. I changed my mailing address to a P.O. box across town. Piece by piece, I dismantled the foundation of his dependency until there was nothing left to stand on. Packing became almost meditative. I took only what I needed: a few photo albums, my father's letters, the tools I couldn't replace, the watch. The rest stayed behind. Clothes I never wore. Books Ryan never read, furniture that had absorbed more silence than conversation. It would all go to the new owners. I didn't feel guilt. I felt clean. On the 4th day, I drove to the county jail, not to visit, but to confirm his release time. Miller Ryan. Release scheduled for 9:00 a.m. on the 14th, the desk sergeant said, barely looking up from his clipboard. I thanked him and left. There was nothing more to say to Ryan, not yet. The note I planned to leave would speak for me. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a single sheet of plain stationery. I wrote slowly, deliberately, each word chosen with care. Ryan, you said the best gift I could give you was to disappear from your life. I'm granting that wish. The house has been sold. I'll be unreachable. Enjoy the independence you've always wanted. I signed it simply Dad. No lectures, no pleading, just fact. I sealed the envelope and wrote his name across the front in block letters. The new owners would hand it to him when he showed up, confused, desperate, expecting everything to be as he left it. The morning of the closing, I walked through each room one last time. The living room where Ryan had opened Christmas presents as a boy. The hallway where his height marks still faintly etched the wall. The kitchen where his mother once hummed while cooking. I didn't linger. Nostalgia was a luxury I couldn't afford. By 10 a.m., the house belonged to Miguel and Sofia Rodriguez. They arrived with their 2 children and a moving truck, smiling, excited, grateful. Sofia thanked me for leaving the house in good condition. Miguel shook my hand firmly, a man ready to make a home out of what I was leaving behind. Do me one favor, I said, handing Sofia the envelope. If a man named Ryan shows up in a few days, give him this. She nodded without hesitation. Of course. That afternoon, I wheeled my suitcases next door to Peter Collins's house. He opened the door with a curious look. "Can I crash here for a couple of days?" I asked. "Sure," he said, stepping aside. "Everything okay? Everything's fine," I replied. And for the first time in years, I actually meant it. From Peter's upstairs guest room, I had a perfect view of my old driveway. The Rodriguez family moved in with an ease that made the house look more alive than it had in years. Their children ran across the lawn that had once been Ryan's soccer field. Miguel carried boxes labeled kitchen and books, while Sophia arranged flower baskets along the porch rail. They weren't rich, just steady people who knew how to value what they had. Watching them felt like watching justice in motion, quiet, decent, undeniable. The next morning, I woke early, brewed a cup of coffee in Peter's kitchen, and settled by the window. At exactly 9:03 a.m., Ryan appeared at the corner of the street, walking fast at first, then slowing as he neared the house. He carried a plastic jail bag and wore the same clothes he'd been arrested in, now wrinkled and sour from 2 weeks behind bars. His shoulders slumped when he saw the Rodriguez family's car in the driveway. He tried the front door key out of habit, jiggling it once then again before realizing it no longer turned. His hand shook as he knocked each rap, echoing faintly up to where I sat unseen. Sophia answered her smile, polite but cautious. Miguel appeared behind her, broad-shouldered, steady. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the moment Sophia placed the envelope in Ryan's hand. He stared at his name written in my block letters, then tore it open. His eyes scanned the page once, twice, 3 times. He sank down onto the porch step, elbows on his knees, the letter dangling between his fingers. The Rodriguez children paused their play, sensing something heavy in the air, before Sophia ushered them back inside. Ryan sat there alone, staring at the letter, as if it were written in a language he didn't understand. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply breathed slow and steady, like a man who had just removed a splinter that had been festering for years. For the first time in a long while, I felt no need to explain myself. Ryan eventually stood, stuffed the letter back into the envelope, and walked down the street with his head bowed. I didn't follow. I didn't call out. His journey from here was his own. That night I sat with Peter on his porch. He handed me a beer, though I didn't open it. We watched the Rodriguez family eat dinner through their lit kitchen window. Laughter rising, the sound of plates clinking against each other, the rhythms of a family that understood gratitude. "You did the right thing," Peter said quietly. "For who?" I asked. "For the house." "For yourself," he replied. I didn't answer. I just watched the porch light of my old home glow warm against the night. It wasn't mine anymore, and strangely, that truth felt lighter than I ever imagined it would. 2 nights later, I heard the knock on Peter's door just after dusk. He raised an eyebrow when he opened it and found Ryan standing there, hair unkempt, eyes rimmed red, holding the envelope I had written. "Is he here?" Ryan asked, his voice sharp, desperate. Peter looked at me before stepping aside. I walked to the doorway, slowly steadying myself like a man approaching a storm he already knew the shape of. Ryan shoved the letter toward me. "You think this is funny?" he hissed. "No," I said evenly. "I think it's necessary. You sold our house while I was locked up." His voice cracked louder now, loud enough for the Rodriguez family across the yard to glance through their window. "You blindsided me." I didn't flinch. "It was never our house, Ryan. It was mine. I worked 35 years for it. You just lived in it. And then you told me the best gift I could give you was to disappear. So I did." His breath came heavy, his hands shaking as he balled the paper in his fist. "Where am I supposed to go? Melissa's talking about staying with her parents, but they don't want me there. I don't have money for rent, no credit, nothing." The bitterness in his tone was familiar, but this time it didn't pierce me. I crossed my arms. That's what independence looks like. You wanted me gone, Ryan. Now you get to stand on your own feet. He stepped closer, eyes wild. You want me on the street? Is that what you want for your son? I met his gaze and didn't waver. I want you to learn what I can't teach you anymore. Responsibility. For a moment, I thought he might strike me, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. But then his shoulders sagged and he turned away. He muttered something under his breath too quiet to catch and stormed off into the night. When I closed the door, Peter let out a low whistle. That boy's going to hit rock bottom, he said. He already has, I replied. Now he gets to decide if he'll climb out. The next morning, I found a voicemail waiting on my phone. Melissa's voice was clipped, annoyed. Mr. Miller, whatever lesson you think you're teaching, it's cruel. Ryan's trying and you've left him with nothing. He needs support, not punishment. He's your family. I didn't call her back. Family isn't about blood, it's about respect, and Ryan had burned that bridge himself. Later that week, Anna called to confirm the transfer of funds. The numbers were cold and precise, sitting cleanly in my account. I went to the bank and arranged a trust, not for Ryan, but for Max, my grandson. Ryan might waste every chance handed to him, but I wouldn't let the next generation pay the price. As I signed the papers, I thought about my father's words again. A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back. Ryan had squandered mine. But Max, maybe he'd learn to value it. That night, as I walked back to Peter's, I passed the old house. The porch light was on, and the Rodriguez children's laughter carried into the night. It didn't hurt, it healed. Ryan's absence had finally made room for something better. The silence of Peter's guest room had begun to feel like a sanctuary. Each morning I brewed coffee in his worn percolator and carried the mug to the window that overlooked my old driveway. From there I could watch the Rodriguez family settle into the house as though it had always been theirs. Sophia hung curtains that fluttered when the breeze carried through the kitchen window. Miguel built a swing set in the yard, where Ryan used to demand I build him a basketball hoop. Their children's laughter filled the air with a kind of innocence my house had not known in years. But the peace outside contrasted sharply with the storm that followed Ryan. 3 days after his release, Peter told me he'd seen Ryan circling the block late at night. His truck rattled down the street like a tin can straining to hold itself together. He parked at the curb across from my old home and sat there for nearly an hour, headlights off, staring at the windows he no longer had a right to enter. Eventually, Miguel went out and stood on the porch. He didn't yell or threaten, he just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. After a few minutes, Ryan drove off. Peter relayed this story to me over the fence one evening, his voice low. He looks lost, Tom, he said. Like a man searching for a door that won't open anymore. He shut that door himself, I answered. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of the truth settle in my chest. Ryan had never learned to live without someone else cushioning his fall. Now for the first time the ground was honest, and he didn't know how to stand on it. The calls began soon after. First it was Ryan himself, his voice raw with frustration. Dad, I get it. You've made your point. Can you at least let me crash with you until I figure something out? No, I told him firmly. You said you wanted me gone. You need to live that truth. Then Melissa called. Her tone was sharper, dripping with resentment. Do you know what you've done to him? He's got nowhere to go. He's falling apart, and it's on you. I didn't argue. Instead, I let her rant until her words wore themselves out. When the call ended, I placed the phone face down on the table and sat in the stillness. For once, I wasn't letting their chaos dictate my peace. Later that week, A friend of Melissa's reached out Sarah, the one who had always seemed more level-headed than the rest. She sent a photo of Melissa at a bar leaning into another man. The timestamp was only 2 nights after Ryan's release. Her message was short. Thought you should know. Don't let him get blindsided. I stared at the photo for a long time before replying. Thank you. Nothing more. I wasn't surprised. Some truths eventually reveal themselves when the performance ends. As I set the phone down, I realized this was no longer about punishing Ryan. It was about letting him confront a world that wouldn't bend to his excuses. And for the first time in years, I felt no urge to rescue him. The next morning, I walked into town to clear my head. The autumn air carried the sharpness of wood smoke and damp leaves, a scent that reminded me of years when Ryan was a boy and we'd rake the yard together. Back then, he used to leap into the piles with a grin so wide it could light up the block. Now he was nearly 30, leaping only into excuses, burying himself under blame that wasn't his to carry. By the time I returned, Peter was waiting on the porch, arms crossed in that quiet way men do when they have news they're not sure you'll want to hear. He came by again last night, he said. Didn't knock, just stood in the yard for a while. Looked like he was working up the courage, but then he left. I nodded. He's circling what he thinks he lost. Doesn't realize it was never his to begin with. Peter tilted his head. He's not going to let go easy, neither will I said more to myself than to him. That afternoon I received another voicemail, this time from Ryan. His tone had shifted, no longer demanding, but frayed. Dad, Melissa's gone. She left me. Took her things, moved out. I don't know what to do. His breathing was uneven, the voice of a man whose scaffolding had finally collapsed. I sat with the message in silence. Every instinct in me wanted to call back, to tell him it would be all right to slip into the old role of rescuer. But that was the role that had kept him from growing up. Love without boundaries had turned into subsidy, and subsidy had turned into entitlement. I couldn't go back to that. Not again. That evening, I penned another note, this one for myself. A reminder written in my own hand: do not rescue. Listen, but do not fix. Love without subsidy. I folded it and slipped it into the drawer beside my father's watch. The following day, Sarah texted me again. Ryan's been crashing on a friend's couch. He's drinking more than he should. He needs help. I thanked her for the concern, but my reply was firm. Help doesn't mean giving him a house again. He has to want more than comfort. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was speaking, not just to her, but to myself. That night, Peter and I sat outside with 2 folding chairs and a quiet between us that didn't need filling. Across the street, Miguel mowed the lawn with measured precision. Sophia brought him a glass of water, her hand resting on his shoulder for a brief second, before she returned inside. It was a simple moment, but it spoke louder than any speech. They were building while Ryan was unraveling. I sipped my coffee and let the warmth settle. My son was adrift, but I was finally anchored. And for once, I understood that the hardest part of being a father wasn't protecting him from the fall. It was letting him hit the ground hard enough to learn how to stand. 2 days later, Ryan finally called instead of leaving another desperate voicemail. His voice came through the line, tight, brittle, carrying more exhaustion than anger this time. Dad, he said, I've been applying for jobs, but no one's calling me back. Nobody wants to take a chance on me. I need help. I let the silence stretch for a beat before answering. You want help, Ryan? I'll give you direction, not a couch. Go to the Workforce Center on 17th. Ask for Mara. She runs orientation. Show up. Sit through it, however boring it feels. Then come back to me with proof. What is this? He snapped. Some kind of game you want me to jump through hoops just to get dinner with my father? It's not a game, I said calmly. It's a plan. And plans work when men stick to them. He cursed under his breath, then hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time afterward, not angry, just steady. If he wanted stability, he'd have to take the first step toward it himself. The following morning, I received a text from him, a photo of a red brick building with a sign that read, Workforce Center. The caption was short, here. 10 minutes later, another photo arrived. A schedule with orientation 800 circled Mara's name scrawled across the bottom. Then a message in session. Boring as hell. For the first time in years, I felt something stir that wasn't frustration. Hope, maybe, though I didn't dare call it that yet. At noon, he sent another photo, this time of a form stamped completed. Underneath, he'd written, they gave me a list of warehouse leads. One does overnight shifts. Pick one. Apply today. Bring proof, I replied. Dinner's on me if you do. By evening, another text buzzed through. It was a photo of a job application with his name scrawled at the bottom. Alongside it, a confirmation email from Pacific Freight application received. Candidate will be contacted. His last message that night was unprompted, a selfie in a mirror at a dingy motel room. His hair was combed. He wore a wrinkled button-down I hadn't seen since his high school senior presentation. The caption read, Trying. I set the phone down and exhaled. Not victory, not forgiveness, just the small relief of seeing motion in the right direction. That night, I pulled my father's watch from the drawer and wound it carefully, listening as the second hand ticked into rhythm again. A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back. Ryan was finally beginning to spend his. When I sat back down at the kitchen table, Peter poured me a glass of water and asked simply, Good day? I nodded. Better than most. Then let it be enough, he said. And for once it was. 2 days after Ryan's application, the call came from Pacific Freight. The message on my phone was short and precise. This is Leah from Dispatch. Ryan Miller listed you as his emergency contact. He showed up early for orientation. Just thought you'd want to know. I played the message twice. Early. That one word mattered more than the job itself. For the first time in years, Ryan wasn't waiting for someone else to drag him forward. He was showing up on his own. That night, he sent me a picture of his hands. The skin at the base of his palms was raw and blistered, the kind of injury honest work leaves behind. The caption read, What do I do about this? I replied. Neoprene gloves with a leather palm. Buy 2 pairs, rotate them. Let your hands learn the work without ripping them open every night. A minute later, his response buzzed, Thanks. Then, almost as an afterthought, feels weird not asking you for money. Weird is good, I wrote back. Weird means new. Over the next week, the texts kept coming short and factual. Shift over, no disasters. Feet hurt, but I made it. Dawn says I'm learning faster than most. Each one read less like a plea and more like a report, the kind a man sends when he wants to be measured by his progress, not his excuses. Meanwhile, Melissa's silence was telling its own story. She hadn't called me since the night she'd tried to pin Ryan's failures on me, but word trickled through Sarah, her friend, that Melissa was seeing someone else. Ryan didn't mention it, but I could read between the lines of his late-night texts, the pauses, the sudden changes of subject. He was hurting, but for once he wasn't turning to me for rescue. One evening, Peter and I sat on his porch as twilight settled in. He handed me a peach sliced in half and said, You know, Tom, men don't always need saving. Sometimes they just need to find honest ground under their feet. I nodded, watching Miguel across the street mowing the lawn, his kids chasing each other in the fading light. Honest ground, that was exactly what Ryan was finally learning to stand on. 2 days later, Ryan sent me another photo. This time it wasn't of his hands or a job schedule. It was of a single-page budget he'd written in a notebook. Rent at the Transitional Housing Food Phone Plan, a small line at the bottom labeled Savings 40 week if nothing breaks. The message underneath simply said, "Trying to make it add up." I stared at the page for a long time before replying. "Math doesn't lie, Ryan. Stick to it. It'll carry you further than excuses ever did." When he texted back, "Okay," I realized it was the first time he had ever agreed to anything without argument. That night, I wound my father's watch again. The second hand ticked steady, each beat a reminder: time wasted is gone forever, but time used honestly, time earned, could still change a man. Sunday morning came with the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. I brewed coffee in Peter's kitchen and carried the mug out to the porch. Across the street, Miguel was adjusting a mower blade, Sophia hanging laundry on the line. Their children laughed as they chalked shapes onto the walkway, life continuing with a rhythm that felt steady and earned. At 9:12, my phone buzzed. It was Ryan, in session. "Resume workshop next. Do I put the jail thing?" I read the message 3 times before replying. "No lies, no confessions. If they ask you, state it as a fact, not an apology." An hour later, done. They gave me 2 warehouse leads. One does overnight shifts. By dinner, another message arrived. It was a photo of a completed application, and beneath it, a confirmation email. His final text that night was a picture of himself in the mirror at the Redwood Inn, wearing the same wrinkled button-down from his high school presentation. The caption was just one word: trying. I didn't smile, but my chest loosened. It wasn't pride, it was relief, the kind that comes from seeing motion in the right direction. That evening, Ryan asked to meet at Java Junction. When I walked in, he was already seated, a glass of water in front of him. He didn't fidget or perform. He just slid a paper across the table, a copy of his job application and the schedule from the workforce center. "They said they'll call in 2 days," he said. "Graveyard shift. Not glamorous, but steady." I nodded. "Steady builds." He swallowed, then looked at me. "I put you down as an emergency contact. If they call, you'll back me up, right?" "Yes," I said. "That's what fathers do. Not to rescue, but to confirm." For the first time in years, Ryan didn't argue, didn't deflect. He just nodded, almost gratefully. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that feels like repair instead of avoidance. When we parted, he said, "I can't live at the Redwood forever." "I know," I replied. "Tomorrow I'll show you how to get on the wait list for transitional housing." It's not fancy, but it's honest. That night I sat on Peter's porch and wound my father's watch. I thought of the boy Ryan had once been, the man he was trying to become, and the long years in between when I'd mistaken rescue for love. A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back. I'd given too much of mine away. But maybe, just maybe, Ryan was learning to spend his wisely. The chapter of revenge. The house, the eviction, the silence was done. What remained was something different. Boundaries holding lessons landing, and a son beginning to understand that responsibility is the only currency that doesn't devalue. The following week, the air carried the crisp bite of late October. Leaves skittered across the pavement, and the sky held that pale gray light that makes the world look honest. I stood at the county courthouse steps waiting. Ryan had asked me to come not to testify or speak for him, but simply to sit in the back while the judge reviewed his probation. When he walked up the steps, he wasn't swaggering like the boy who once mocked me at his birthday. He looked smaller, quieter, as though the weight of his own choices had finally settled across his shoulders. He gave me a quick nod, not a plea, not a performance, just acknowledgement. Inside, the courtroom was sterile, smelling faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. Cases rolled one after another, each a small tragedy with its own script. When Ryan's name was called, he stepped forward. Ryan Miller, the clerk, announced, her voice flat. The judge scanned the file. Trespass. Failure to comply. 14 days served. Probation, 12 months fines as ordered. Completion of a conflict de-escalation class required. He paused, then looked directly at Ryan. Do you understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor? Ryan said. His voice was steady, neither defiant nor broken. The gavel fell, a sound far smaller than the dramas it ended. Just wood striking wood, declaring authority. Ryan turned, saw me sitting in the last row, and for the first time in years, his eyes didn't harden. He didn't mouth an apology, but the recognition was there. He knew I'd shown up even when I hadn't carried him. Outside, under the brittle shade of a maple tree, he joined me on the sidewalk. Thanks for coming, he said. You asked? I replied. Sometimes the hardest thing a man can do is stand behind his own request. He let out a breath that sounded halfway between a sigh and a laugh. The class is Friday evenings. The instructor said, we'll all think we're the reasonable ones. Maybe you are, I said. But you won't be the only one. We walked together toward his battered truck. Melissa wasn't in the passenger seat this time. He didn't explain, and I didn't ask. Some silences teach more than words. As he pulled away, I stayed standing at the curb. The courthouse behind me, the street ahead, two directions that didn't need to overlap anymore. For the first time, I felt the clean line between where my responsibility ended and where his began. That night back at Peter's, I signed over another portion of the house sale funds into Max's trust. The numbers clicked into place with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. It wasn't about punishing Ryan anymore. It was about protecting a future he had almost cost his own son. Peter poured us each a glass of water and said, "Looks like you've stopped rescuing and started living." Maybe for the first time, I admitted, and for once I believed it. By the end of that week, Ryan had started his first official shift at Pacific Freight. The text came at 2:14 a.m. A grainy photo of his time card stamped with the hours he'd logged. The caption read, "Harder than I thought. Not impossible." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. That's what honest work feels like. Eat protein before the shift. Drink water even when you don't want to. He didn't answer right away, but an hour later, another buzz came through. Don says the same thing. Says I'm not useless after all. Don, the older worker who'd taken Ryan under his wing. I didn't know the man, but already I respected him. Sometimes the right stranger can do more for a son than a father's lifetime of speeches. 2 days later, Ryan sent another message. This time it wasn't just about work. Melissa's gone for good. Took her things. Says she needs stability. There was no exclamation point, no anger, just the fact laid bare. I replied with 2 words. I'm sorry. Not an I told you so, not a lecture. Just truth without gloating. That evening, Peter and I sat on his porch as the sky faded to navy. He handed me a folding chair and said, "Word travels. Folks are saying Ryan's showing up to work on time. That's more than most can claim." I nodded, looking across the street where Miguel was carefully trimming the hedges. Showing up, that's half the battle. Maybe more, Peter said. You keep showing up long enough, people start believing you belong. That night, I wound my father's watch again, listening to the tick of the second hand. Time had a way of telling the truth, whether we wanted it to or not. Ryan was finally spending his in ways that couldn't be excused or erased. The following week, he met me at Java Junction again. No coffee this time, just water. He slid a notebook across the table. Inside was a handwritten budget rent at Transitional Housing Food Staples prepaid phone plan. At the bottom, a line read, "Savings 40 week if nothing breaks." He looked at me like he expected laughter or dismissal. Instead, I nodded. Math doesn't lie. Stick to it, and you'll have more than pride, you'll have proof. For the first time in years, Ryan didn't argue. He just sat there chewing the inside of his cheek, then said, "It feels different. Not easy. Just mine." "Good," I said. "Ownership always feels heavier. That's how you know it's real." When he left, he didn't ask for money. He didn't even ask for advice. He just said, "Same time next week." "Yes," I answered. Watching him walk to his truck, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. The revenge was behind me now. The eviction, the silence, the selling of the house, they were all steps to get here. What mattered now wasn't punishment. It was whether Ryan could stand on his own 2 feet without me as a crutch. And for the first time in decades, I thought maybe, just maybe, he could. The next Friday evening, I found myself back at the courthouse, not for Ryan this time, but to hear him out after his first conflict de-escalation class. We met at a small diner across the street, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. Ryan slid into the booth opposite me, his uniform shirt still smelling faintly of machine oil. He looked tired, but not beaten. "Class was strange," he said, stirring his coffee. "The instructor kept saying the only 2 times you win a fight are before it starts, or when you decide not to show up." I nodded. "She's right. Most men learn that too late." He smirked, though, without malice. "Guess I'm on schedule, then." The waitress poured us each a refill and left without comment. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I saw Max this week. Jenna brought him to the park. He's taller, smarter too. He asked me if I had a job now. I told him yes." His voice caught, and for a moment he looked younger, stripped of all bravado. "Dad," he believed me. I felt something tighten in my chest. "Kids believe what they see, Ryan. If you keep showing up, he'll believe you're a man worth following." He looked down at his hands, roughened and blistered from the warehouse. "These don't look like much, but they feel like the first honest thing I've earned in years." I didn't rush to fill the silence. Some truths need room to breathe. Later that week, Peter caught me in the yard. "Heard your boy's been clocking in on time. Foreman says he's quiet, but steady." "Quiet and steady beats loud and useless," I replied. Peter chuckled. "Amen to that." One evening after Ryan's shift, he sent me a photo of his locker at the transitional housing. Inside were 2 pairs of gloves, a folded uniform, and a cheap thermos I'd left at reception for him without a note. His text read, "Thanks. It works." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I wound my father's watch and let the second hand remind me that small victories matter most when they're earned. The next Sunday, Ryan showed up at Java Junction again, this time with something new. A notebook page filled with numbers, his first attempt at a savings plan. "If I stick to this," he said, "I'll have 200 by the end of the month. Maybe enough to get my own place in 6. I studied the page, then looked at him. "It's not about the number, Ryan. It's about the discipline. Money without discipline disappears faster than you can count it." He nodded slowly. "I know. This time I want it to stick." For the first time in a long while, I believed him. Walking home that evening, I realized the revenge was over. The house was gone. The silence had been endured, and the boundary had held. What remained now was something harder but more valuable, the possibility of rebuilding not as rescuer and dependent, but as 2 men learning how to stand on honest ground. By mid-November, Ryan's texts carried a different weight. They weren't desperate pleas or angry accusations anymore. They were updates, small and steady, like a man laying bricks one by one. "Shift over," No disasters. Hands taped. Don says I'm doing it right this time. Made it through the week without being late. One evening he sent me a picture of his palm. The calluses were thick now, the raw blisters healed into something tougher. Beneath the photo he wrote, "Hurts less. Feels stronger." That was the first time I caught myself smiling at a message from him in years. At Java Junction the following week, Ryan arrived before me. He had 2 waters on the table and a folded piece of paper waiting. When I sat down, he slid it across. "Budget update," he said. Inside were columns, income expenses, savings. His handwriting was messy but determined. At the bottom, in big letters, he'd written $120 saved so far. "Not much," he said quickly, almost defensive. "It's honest," I replied. "That makes it more than enough." He leaned back, exhaling. "Feels different, Dad. Like every dollar means something. I never thought I'd say this, but it feels better than anything I ever wasted money on." We didn't need to say more. Sometimes progress speaks loud enough on its own. That Friday he texted me after his de-escalation class. "Mara says anger is just energy with nowhere to go. I'm learning to put it somewhere else." "Good," I wrote. "Put it into the work. Put it into Max." He didn't reply, but the next morning, a picture came through Max, holding a drawing of a watch with crooked numbers and 2 hands pointing in opposite directions. The caption read, "Max wanted you to see his promise clock." I stared at the picture for a long time, my father's real watch ticking on the dresser beside me. A man's time is the only thing he can't buy back. Maybe Ryan was learning that too. Meanwhile, Melissa had faded into the background. Word around town was that she'd moved south chasing something she thought would fix her life. Ryan never mentioned her, and I didn't bring her up. Some doors close with a slam. Others just stop opening. Peter noticed the difference in me one evening as we sat on his porch. "You look lighter," he said, sipping from his chipped mug. "Maybe because I've stopped carrying what was never mine to hold," I answered. He nodded. "That's how men age well, by letting go before the weight breaks them." As November drew to a close, I began planning my move to the coast. A small cottage by the ocean windows that remembered what wind was for. I told Ryan I'd be leaving soon. He didn't argue, didn't accuse. He just asked, "Can I come by before you go, with Max?" "Yes," I said. "That's the right way to say goodbye." And for the first time I knew it would be. The Sunday before my move, the knock on Peter's porch door came just as the evening sun dipped low. It wasn't loud, not demanding, just steady. When I opened it, Ryan stood there with Max at his side. Max clutched a folded piece of paper, his small hands smudged with pencil. "Grandpa," he said proudly, "I made us a family picture." He unfolded it, and there we were, 4 stick figures labeled in block letters: Mom, Max, Dad, Grandpa. My throat tightened at the sight. Jenna must have guided his hand, but the choice of who to include was his. He hadn't left me out. Ryan shifted, awkward but sincere. "Max wanted to give it to you before you left." I crouched, knees popping, and ruffled the boy's hair. "I'll put it on my fridge, buddy. Then when you visit me by the ocean, you'll see it's still there." His smile lit up the porch like a lamp. We sat together, the 3 of us, on Peter's old chairs. Peter joined us, setting down bowls of peaches and 3 small ice creams. "Dessert helps goodbyes taste better," he muttered, pretending not to notice how my hands shook. Ryan cleared his throat. "Dad, I need to say something." He looked down at Max first, then back at me. "I'm sorry for all of it. The things I said on my birthday, the way I treated you, the house, the money, everything." The words weren't wrapped in excuses or dressed with pride. They were plain, the way the truth ought to be. I kept my eyes on Max, who was licking melted chocolate from his fingers. "Thank you," I said simply. I accept. Ryan's shoulders eased, and for once the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was healing. When it was time to go, Max hugged me with the blind trust only children know. Ryan extended his hand. I took it firm, steady, no theatrics. Just two men agreeing that the past didn't have to dictate the future. After they left, I stood on the porch, the family drawing in my hand. The house I was about to leave behind hummed with quiet, like it knew its work here was finished. That night, I placed my father's watch in a small, felt-lined box. I set it beside an envelope addressed to Ryan, not in block letters this time, but in my normal handwriting. Inside was a short note. When a man means it, time gives him back his name. A photocopy of Max's trust summary was tucked behind it. I didn't know when Ryan would see it. Maybe years from now, maybe sooner. What mattered was that he would know the truth, that the legacy I was leaving wasn't revenge or punishment, but responsibility passed forward. As I lay in Peter's guest room one last night, the house settled around me. Tomorrow I would drive west to a cottage by the ocean to windows that remembered the wind. But tonight I slept, knowing the line between father and son had finally been redrawn, not erased, not abandoned, but made honest. Looking back, I realized the revenge was never about eviction police lights, or even selling the house. It was about drawing a line that should have been drawn years earlier. My son thought the best gift I could give him was to disappear. In truth, the gift was showing him what life looked like when support was no longer guaranteed. Only then did he begin to discover the man he could be. There's a lesson here not just for fathers and sons, but for every family. Love is not the same as rescue. Rescuing can cripple while boundaries can teach. If you're a parent, still paying every bill, carrying every burden, or excusing every mistake for a grown child, ask yourself this: are you giving love? Or are you denying them the chance to grow? Sometimes the hardest act of love is stepping back and letting consequences do the teaching. Ryan is still learning, and so am I. But I no longer feel anger when I think of him. I feel a quiet hope, the kind built not on promises but on proof. And for the first time in a long while, I believe time might finally be on our side. Have you ever lived through a moment when boundaries taught more than words could? How did it change your family? Share your story in the comments. If this one meant something to you, please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked and pass it on. Thank you for listening.